Hey everybody, I think we're going to go ahead and get started so we can have as much time for conversation as possible. Hi, welcome. I know a lot of you are here this morning for the first session and then some of you just joined us. Thanks for being here today. This is Plan Lafayette's second session of the year. And today we're putting a focus on economic development and development in general. And today at lunch we're going to talk about utilizing downtown Lafayette as a regional economic development asset. We've got a great group of panelists with us today. But before I introduce them, I just want to kind of put a frame around this discussion and let you know how we're going to focus. But I don't think I introduced myself. Anita Begno. I'm with the Downtown Development Authority and Downtown Lafayette Unlimited, and excited to facilitate this conversation today. So things we're going to talk about today, and so be thinking about how the panelists are going to answer these questions, and then we save time for you to ask questions at the end. What we want to accomplish today is talking about why develop in downtown Lafayette, how the Acadiana region can leverage downtown Lafayette's development for its own success, which if you were here this morning, you heard from Bill Rodier and Jeffrey Stewart about things happening in opportunity zones in other parts of the region, and they all pointed back to downtown Lafayette as the center of the region. And then what are the challenges and opportunities to developing in Lafayette and downtown Lafayette more specifically? Because why we're here today is to talk about Plan Lafayette, our comprehensive plan. It's the 5th year of our first 5-year plan. And Danielle Bro and her team want feedback from you, the community, folks who own properties downtown, own businesses downtown, and who are interested in developing downtown, to give feedback on how we can amend our comprehensive plan to make downtown Lafayette more developable. Some other things we're going to kind of more generally focus on is where are we now? And the panelists are going to kind of share some of those things with you. Where do we want to go? And how does our planning need to evolve to get us there? So I want to welcome our panel. I'm going to ask that each of them take 3 minutes to tell you a little bit about themselves and what their experience is in developing projects, but I'm going to quickly go through all of them, and then we're going to start with Gary. So first we have Gary Broussard. He's a Senior Vice President and Acadiana Market President for Home Bank. Rebecca Miller, she's the Program Coordinator at LPTFA, that's Lafayette Public Trust Financing Authority. Yes. Jim Poche, who's the CEO of the Southwest Group. Eric Crozier, Senior Architect and Principal at Abel & Crozier. And then lastly, we have Ryan Peko. He's the Senior Retail Leasing and Development Executive at Sterling Properties. So I'm going to hand my mic to Gary and ask him to take just a couple of minutes to tell you who he is and his experience in developing in downtown Lafayette.
Good afternoon. As was mentioned, I'm the Market President for Home Bank here in Lafayette. Been there soon to be 18 years. This year will be 42 years in the banking business. Born and raised, I'm a native from Lafayette and spent a little time in Houston early on in my career and then moved back here in 1982 and officed downtown with what was at the time Guarantee Bank, Premier Bank, and then Bank One, and joined Home Bank in 2001 before Chase came into town. But obviously my involvement with downtown has been, as I mentioned, I was office there, and then we have done a number of projects over the years in the downtown area, and we're currently continue to be involved in projects there, so, and happy to do so. So I'm happy to be here this afternoon and pass the mic.
Well, I'm Rebecca Miller. I'm with the Lafayette Public Trust Financing Authority, and if a lot of y'all aren't aware, LPTFA is a public trust. We receive no tax dollars. All of our money comes from our investments. And over the years, actually many years ago, LPTFA has been involved in downtown Lafayette through a lot of grants that we've done. We purchased the old federal courthouse building back in 1996, and we donated it to the city of Lafayette. We granted $850,000 to the Rosa Parks Transportation Center. We granted $875,000 to Acadiana Center for the Arts. Then around 2012, LPTFA became even more active in downtown Lafayette. We developed the Uptown Lofts 73 unit apartment complex located on Pierce and Congress. We developed an artist loft development, 15 units, studios at LWG. We've done renovations of office buildings on our campus. And mostly all of these projects, we've applied historic tax credits to these projects to help fund them. And we have a couple other projects in the works, and one of them is a 70-unit market rate apartment complex on Monroe Street. So that's my introduction. I'm going to pass it on to Jim.
Thanks. I'm Jim Poche with the CEO of the Southwest Group, and it represents a number of companies. One of them is Poche Pruitt, who's an architectural engineering firm. Southwest Contractors, that's a general construction company. Southwest Mechanical, it's a mechanical service company. We have a real estate company, Southwest Real Estate, and the development company, Southwest Development. And we started off, I guess, just when we moved to into downtown about 20 years ago as an architectural engineering firm, and expanded all of those companies from that point, and all of us operate downtown with those different companies. From a development standpoint downtown, I was raised in the St. Street area, so I stayed in downtown all of my early years when J.C. Penney and all of these other places were downtown. And so we've started building downtown and doing acquisitions when it became cost effective to be able to build a building and lease it to somebody. And so some of the properties we have the old AT&T building that we have our offices in. We used to be in the old Dixie Office Supply building at 201 West Vermillion that we've now leased out to somebody else. We've acquired the old Jefferson Street Market, and have Proficient as a tenant in that building. We own the Tribune building that has the French press and the bike shop in it, and the photography place, and the Calcor building, a little two-story brick building across from Chase, and a lot of property on Buchanan between our office and Vermillion. So the reason I mention that, it's unique to downtown. There's not one big tract of land that you buy up and do a multi-development on it. Each piece is looking at what property is available, how does it integrate into some type of plan that moves into doing something. So over the last 20 years, that's kind of what we've done. And so we do the whole thing from designing it to building it to operating it. Talk a little bit, just real quick, about the residential and commercial. We focus more on commercial for the basic reason it's easier to have a 5-year lease with somebody and manage something like that that's got a return on it than an apartment that has maybe a 1-year tenant and creates the same cash flow on a per square foot basis as the office does. So we'll maybe talk about a little bit more about what we do. So we haven't done any residential yet, but we will.
Good afternoon, Eric Crozier, April Crozier Architects. I'm a principal architect there. My business partner and I are also developers. We've got a couple of buildings downtown and 3 other ones around South Louisiana. Did not grow up, or actually wasn't born in Louisiana. Married a girl from Leonville, so I guess that just makes me from here. Made many promises to my mother-in-law, so I'm here to stay. I guess as an architect and a developer, especially downtown, we went on our own 17 years ago, and the first thing we did when we decided to stop watching The Price is Right and get up and go do something after our wives had an intervention, we got a P.O. box downtown. We weren't downtown at the beginning, but that's where we always wanted to be, and we ended up purchasing Peter Piccioni's building off of East Main Street. He was the original building on that block. Don O'Rourke, an architect, did a great job on that back in the mid-'50s, and we purchased it. 30 days later, Deepwater Horizon sank, so we weren't sure about that, but I guess everything came out all right. We love downtown. It's got its own challenges, but honestly, for us and what we did, it wasn't anything that was insurmountable. I believe everybody at my office right now is all UL grads, so we love the university. as well. We see its tie to downtown. We think it should be stronger, and we work every day to try to accomplish that. But as a architect and a developer, we have a little interesting perspective, probably some similar to Jim here too. From a design standpoint and an owner standpoint, we've spent our own money and risked our own money 5 different times, and it certainly does bring a different perspective on. You always hear the word OPM, other people's money. Well, sometimes it's not. So, but I think that factors into different perspectives, especially downtown. So, looking forward to the conversation. Thanks, I appreciate it.
If you send that back to her. Happy now? Okay, she was anxious without a microphone over there, I can promise you. Ronnie Paco with Sterling Properties. I've been with Sterling for about 18 years now. Mainly focused in the retail segment of that genre of commercial real estate. And as any profession, your scope starts small until your resume builds, and then you do larger and larger projects. The last 10 years or so, I've really been a national retail guy. Do a lot of site selection for brands that you would know and where you spend your money. Also the retail development side from a shopping center perspective, culminating with the Ambassador Town Center where Costco is. We put that project together. I think we cut the ribbon on that in 2016. That was 3 years to kind of start that and then end that. And then it's obviously ongoing from a management perspective. So I'm not real good at regurgitating the same goal over and over. So shortly thereafter, we brought that to the market. I kind of pivoted my career and started focusing on just as impactful projects, but a different scale, less greenfield development, more infill development. And that really changes a lot from a standpoint that the challenges are similar in some perspectives, and they're grossly different in others. And so there's some takeaways that you can learn in the previous kind of world, but your pipeline changes. So it's kind of been a reset of a career to a certain extent, which is something I afforded myself to do. My wife was looking to open her own business, so I took some time away to develop that for her. I've been working on 2 projects in downtown that I would deem most people would call substantial for the last 10 months or so. One of which we're hoping to announce kind of midsummer, and maybe the other a little sooner, which we may touch on those a little bit here. But excited to be focused on downtown, and I've worked on a few other projects that just haven't come to fruition. But getting kicked in the knees allows you to understand where some of those hurdles are, and you reposition yourself for the next project moving forward to avoid that pitfall.
Thanks, Ryan. Really quickly, I want to welcome back Mayor President Joel Robideau to say a few words before he has to head off, because we have a lot of new faces in the room.
Thank you. Is this one working? Yeah, you can. All right, there you go. That way you can keep your mic, Anita.
Thanks.
I heard. Hey, welcome again. Glad to be back. As it relates to downtown, I do want to make a few comments. Obviously, some of the folks here at the table have been working on revitalizing downtown in positive ways for a long time. And as most of you know, sometimes really good things take a long time. And so when I took office, or actually even before then when I was in the legislature, there was this natural competition as it relates to downtown versus developing other places. And while that competition is understandable because everybody wants it to happen where they are, there was a missing piece of the discussion I felt that existed as it related to downtown. What the rest of the parish I didn't feel like had an appreciation for was that downtown is part of the parish. And when downtown is developed, and it's 100 million or 200 million or 400 million, but there's a lot of opportunities downtown, that's parish property taxes. That's not City of Lafayette only. And that's significant when you look at where the parish budget stands. So any development that can happen anywhere in Lafayette Parish benefits the entire parish. There's not many places where there's the opportunity for hundreds of millions of dollars of development opportunity other than downtown. And that's an area where we don't have to lay new roads, new water lines. We may need to upgrade some of that stuff, but it's already in existence. And so to ignore the fact that as downtown goes, so does the parish budget, I think was missing in a lot of the conversations over the course of the last decade or so. Certainly not lost on these folks, right? These guys and a lot of other folks have been pushing the downtown story for quite a while. But politically, when you consider that it was difficult to even redevelop an old federal courthouse that had been sitting blighted for almost 19 years, just suggests that there was something missing in the conversation. And so as the old federal courthouse, as the Buchanan garage property, as all of the other developments that are going to be happening in the downtown area start moving, then the whole parish benefits from that. That's more money for the school systems, that's more money for the sheriffs, that's more money for drainage, that's more money for all the things that the parish is responsible for. So please join this panel and many others and not be short-sighted, and understand that as development happens downtown, it is to the benefit of all of Lafayette Parish, and we need to figure out how to make that happen and happen as quickly as possible. I will say the one thing that's happened most recently was that downtown was included in the opportunity zones. So what was already a significant effort and push to begin with is now accelerated because of the census of downtown being in the opportunity zone. So these guys, as much as any other group, are driving that conversation about what can happen. And as y'all know from this morning's conversation, the opportunity zone is a fairly short window. That timeline is limited. And you're not going to find many places that are better suited for quick action than the downtown area. So thank y'all for being willing to share your thoughts on how to make that happen. And everyone that's here, thank you for coming again, because engaging in these conversations is what's going to allow us to do the best possible job. So Nita, thanks for the invitation to come give a quick few words. I thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Mayor President Roboto just covered a lot of the topics that we're going to talk about in this discussion, and we're going to try to kind of keep it free-flowing between the panelists so we can mosey back and forth between different topics, because there's a lot to cover. But I want to kind of orient us from an economic development perspective. So if you haven't heard yet, a lot of us just got back from Greenville, South Carolina, not Greenville. And one of the main takeaways for a lot of us, I believe, is something that Mayor Knox White said, which was that downtown Greenville is the economic development calling card for Greenville and for the region. And so I want to start with Jim and talk about that. Do you believe the same thing about downtown Lafayette, that it's the calling card for economic development for the region? Why or why not? And if not yet, then how do we get there?
It's on? All right.
On.
I guess one of the things about downtown that I don't think is going to leave, the parish courthouse is there, the federal courthouse is there. Most of the banking institutions, at least some of the large ones, have offices there. And I don't think, although some have left to go in other locations, I don't think it's always going to be a banking center. There's schools downtown that are historic to the community. The churches, the Baptist church, the Catholic church, the Methodist church. So there's a lot of significant centers that I don't think are moving away because they're a tradition in the community. If you look back at some of the families that belong to those churches, they've been here for decades, I forget what the word is, anyway, for a long time, for over 100 years in some cases. So I think those people have a reason to want to be down there, and I don't think they're going to leave. So it's a civic center, a school center, a church center. Outside of that, it's very close to the university, and the university is at the center. And it certainly has an opportunity to complement that. So I got into that and I kind of missed what your question was.
Economic development calling card. Is it currently? Could it be? How do we
Right,
move
so-
in that direction?
So I think that's the reason it is a calling card for that. It's between the university and downtown, we really have an opportunity to do something. So it's an opportunity that we've taken advantage of for commercial real estate, basically office space. And we were lucky enough to corner several of the international IT companies. And so we probably have 150 engineers that work in 4 of our buildings that we have that all need a place to live. We haven't done that yet. It's maybe unfortunate for the downtown. We've had enough commercial tenants in our buildings that we didn't need to go to residential, but the residential is going to be an essential part of it. And so we'll dabble with maybe a small complex, because we're downtown, we can maintain them and do it ourselves. We're watching others with what they're doing to decide whether we expand that to a large scale residential. But so that's the calling card, and all of our buildings are almost always full. We've got one vacant space right now that somebody moved out to that we already have 2 or 3 people looking at. So we're full, and so it works.
Thanks, Jim. So, Eric, you were actually on the trip with us in Greenville. So, talk to us about kind of your takeaways and thoughts about downtown Lafayette being, that tool in our toolkit for economic development.
Well, I think, certainly, like Jim was saying, it's a hub, it's a draw. But just because of its density, the fact that the streets are there, the infrastructure's there. I'm not going to say it's cheap to get in, but as for the community, it's cheap to get in. We don't have to build roads, out in the middle of nowhere. There are assets already downtown. Like Greenville decided to take advantage of the assets that it had. It forgot about a river that was flowing through its downtown. They removed a 4-lane bridge to accentuate that river. So they went through some effort. So, there's the tendency to think, well, we don't have a river. Well, but we have other assets. So I think for downtown to be viewed as an asset is first and foremost, identify what you feel that asset is. It actually could be a little different for everybody. But because of its density and actually, parking is this problem. I see parking as a problem because I see the lots that people are parking on as all those are opportunities. That's all. There's a higher and better use than that being a parking lot. And that's another thing that from an economic standpoint, it's there already. It's the street in front of it's already at some point we'll decide it's okay to walk a couple of blocks. And whenever we figure that out, then those are going to become assets to those owners rather than $35 a month for 15 parking spots. I think they're selling themselves short as a landowner. So I think Greenville realized that. I think we will as well. There's a little momentum, I think, and there's certainly a perception of that. So I don't know. I just think it's a calling card because it's ready.
So, Gary, when you and I spoke about this panel and we're preparing for it, we talked about momentum a lot. And we were talking about why now was the right time to develop in downtown Lafayette. And Gary said because of a lot of momentum that's happening. Can you touch on that a little bit more and help us think about it from a lens of lending, credit, financial stability?
Sure. Currently, Home Bank is participating in really 3 projects downtown. 2 of them are with LPTFA. One a renovation project, another an apartment complex. And we have a 3rd project that is with private investors that's going up as we speak. So we always look forward to the opportunity to participate in the community reinvestment process, and happy to do that. As far as the momentum, the old federal courthouse is going to be a great project, and that, as the mayor said, has sat for a long time, and so that in itself has created additional momentum on top of all the other things over the past few years that have been going on. The recent announcement of a grocery store going into downtown, which is going to be very important to people living downtown, and there are some living downtown already, but to attract more, that's going to be really, really important. So that's some serious momentum. Things things aren't perfect. You know, we talk, the infrastructure obviously needs some work in some areas, but there's so much, there's more going on, I think, right now than maybe ever before, and the future looks really, really bright. So I think that's it.
As far as developing in downtown, I've always been a proponent that it's better to develop in the core of your city, and then it makes the rest of your city better. But that's the urban planner in me. So LPTFA has always supported a lot of different things, and downtown redevelopment has been one of them at this time. As far as our apartment complex goes, our new market rate one, we've done 2 separate market studies on this, and it all shows that we'll be leased up within 2 years, which is really unbelievable. There's some still existing apartment complex that I went to a couple of weeks ago in Baton Rouge, brand new, and they're 3-4 years old and they're not fully leased up. So I feel very positive about this, and I think downtown is really where the growth should occur, and I think people are interested in making that happen finally.
Yeah, I think that we often talk about the momentum as kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of what we're focused on, right? And there's been a lot of recent leadership that pushes towards this. But there's a flip side of it too, and the beautiful thing is the stars are kind of aligning, because there's the consumer-driven momentum. Part of the reason that I did pivot in my career is because the consumer's changing, and you want to stay ahead of what they're doing. And so from a retail perspective, what a consumer is demanding in 2019, 2020, and moving forward is very different than it was in the 80s, the 90s. Each decade it moves around. And so our consumer, America's consumer, is very interested in a walkable environment, in organic products, and locally sourced foods and crafts and everything else, and that organically happens in a downtown and a core where you have other people that are facilitating those opportunities. And so with the consumer's shift changing, and look, our economy has diversified substantially. LEDA's got a big role to play in that with the tech jobs, and what UL's producing, and those students like this culture, so they want to stay here. So they want to live downtown. They want to walk downtown. They want the scooters back, which is a whole other thing. But at the end of the day, with the consumer asking for it and people focused on giving it, that's when the production really starts to occur.
So, Gary, you touched on this a little bit, and we're going to kind of shift the conversation a little bit to talk about some of the challenges that we're facing with developing in downtown Lafayette, because part of what we're here to do today is figure out how we as a community work through some of those challenges and use our plan to help us get there. And so I want to spend a little bit of time hearing from the panelists, talking about what challenges are we currently facing. These are property owners. These are people trying to currently do deals downtown. These are people who have done deals and want to do more deals downtown, so they know all about it. I'm going to ask Rebecca to start here, because she said something really good yesterday about being educated and understanding the right questions to ask.
So I worked for planning and zoning for 20 years. I was a development manager for a long time. And now being on the other side and actually developing, what I've always learned and known is that it's not really, you have to ask the right question. And it's being able to go to the planning and zoning office or meet with the people at Public Works and say, this is what I want to accomplish, and how can you help me get there? Because this is a hard-working group of people. They work more nights than anybody in this room. And it's really, I don't have any complaints on that. It's always just, how can you help me get to where I need to be?
Clearly there are challenges, and there's challenges at any level of development. I don't care if you're developing out greenfield stuff or you're developing in core infill. I think when you choose to be a developer and wear that hat to work every day, that you need to understand that a lot of problem solving is going to have to come with that. I've never been a part of a project that we just shoot something in. I mean, you're rounding corners, you're breaking rules, you're doing what you have to do to get it to happen. In downtown specifically, I mean, there's physical challenges. If you're redeveloping a building, it's got brick walls already, right? It's got a sewer capacity that is what it is. It's got trees that are in front. Like, there's real things that you need to work around. And there's technical issues. Code has evolved, and the utility providers need a certain right of way on streets. Well, we can't change where the building is placed. The fact that it's on the property line, it's not set back like it is in newer development. So when you go for permitting and you say, hey, I want to do this, and the comments you get back are, well, we need a 10-foot utility easement. Well, I can't give you one unless I knock 10 feet of my building off. And it goes back to Rebecca's point. It's how you ask the question and let the staff of all the municipal entities, LUS, DPW, P&D, DNP, just P&Z, whatever, something. They want to help, but you need to approach them with the capacity to let them help. So when you get to a spot where you can't provide an easement, have your engineer put together a survey that shows where the conflict points are and try to figure out how you maneuver around that. It's not just throw your hands up, well, I can't do it. I mean, another physical restraint is obviously the sewer. We know a lot about the sewer, and LUS is working on a long-term solution. There's interim solutions. One of the projects I'm working on hopefully is going to provide a pretty large stopgap, because we knew we needed to do something to have the capacity to develop what we wanted to develop. We also knew there was an opportunity to make the world a better place by doing more than that. And LUS has been Johnny on the spot, running with solutions and opportunities of how to accomplish that. But it's the approach of this, what we're trying to accomplish, meet early, meet often, let them guide you, and you can get to where you want to go. It may not be exactly where you want, but it's accomplishable.
I'll just throw out a couple of things that maybe a little bit that I might have missed earlier on. And one of them was how important the LUS Fiber was to everything that's going on right now. I think it's a very controversial issue when it came up, and maybe still is today from a lot of people. But had we not done that, I think to generate interest in other fiber companies to upgrade and do what they're doing, that's really that and the university and the degree programs that has to do that, with two key elements to bringing those the tech people together, along with LEADA and a lot of the other focuses that brought those in. But when you look at that, the people that are using it, the hospitals, they're teaching institutions now, so they have doctors and staff that want to live somewhere. As urban environment is a real popular thing across the whole country. So back into why that's happening. So the hospitals, the university itself with its professors and the students wanting that living environment, and then the grocery stores and the office spaces and everything that support that go on. But I think so I think LCG and its leadership over the years has really helped make those things happen. And whether it be community development or LEADA or DDA, I think those groups are starting to come together to work more as a team with the developers and the others, where it really wasn't that good of a relationship in the years past. So I think we have an opportunity right now that's with UDC and everything else that's come together. I think we've become a much tighter group, and if we get together, we can really make something happen on that. But I didn't want to mess up on the fiber part. I thought that and the university were really important.
I'll just make a quick comment about obstacles, and I'll go back to the momentum word. And the more momentum, sometimes the less significant the obstacles seem. And if you take one obstacle at a time, then you start making real progress. So it's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be real quick, but the momentum is there, and momentum makes people realize that this can happen, whatever it is at the moment, whatever the focus is on at that time. So again, momentum, key word.
Well, Gary, you cut mine in half, so thank you. I think it's simple. I think we're starting to see it a little bit more, but creativity isn't just limited to what something may look like or function as. I mean, creativity is, and you kind of starting to see it now, I guess, needs to be driven down into government. You know, what some of the most dangerous words in business that certainly apply to some of these situations is because we've always done it that way. When you hear because we've always done it that way, you should take a step back and say, okay, why is it that way? And it could just be something as simple as because we've always done it that way. So I think some of those are, by saying that, becomes a barrier, but you're starting to see some chinks in that armor, if you will. So creativity and faith. I think faith, you have to believe that this is going to happen. You have to believe it. You got to wake up every day thinking it's going to happen and believing it's going to happen. You have to have faith it's going to happen. If you have faith it's going to happen, then it'll permeate to other people, and it'll permeate to action, and it will get pushed from the administration down into the decision makers that are out in the field, you know, asking you to put a tree where you're like, okay, I'll put a tree there, but you realize that, you know, there's a fire hydrant going to go right there. Put a tree there, move it later. You know, I've had that conversation. We just got to push it a little further down, you know, but I think faith is going to happen. Be creative, and we'll get there. I really believe that.
So Jim talked about collaboration, which I've been in this job for 6 months, and I've seen a whole lot of collaboration. This panel is an example of pulling a bunch of different people together who are going down the same path, or maybe taking different journeys, maybe have different, you know, stops along the way, but all are working toward revitalizing downtown Lafayette. I think everybody in this room believes that that's the direction we should go in, and that's why you're here today. So I think it's important to point out that collaboration point about leveraging professionals. It's not just DDA's job alone or LCG's job alone. It's our collective job to help us figure out how to get there together, leveraging professionals who wake up every day and think about the properties that they own downtown and the developments that they've worked on over the 20 years of their career to help us find timely and effective solutions to the obstacles that we have. It's not just shouting that we have them. It's figuring out together how to get over those humps. So, you know, I think everyone in this room feels like they play some sort of role in doing that, and I think that's how we're going to overcome some of the obstacles we're facing, whether it be sewage infrastructure, parking, or whatever else is going to come our way as we do things we've never done before. So speaking of, I know you've all kind of touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to give the audience a little bit of a peek into some of the projects that you're working on. You know, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, just to kind of get folks excited about things that are happening, because I get to hear about them every day, but I don't know that everyone in this room gets to hear about some of the cool things that are happening. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be your project. It's things happening around you, or maybe you're a part of a team of something that's going on. What can you share? Anybody?
Okay, so recently we've acquired another building downtown that we're expanding one of our tech companies into. They want to be into a warehouse type environment, and so we're doing that. We are going to put 12 apartments downtown in one of our existing buildings that we have by adding on to it. It's structured to have a second and third floor on it. And we're going to experiment with that. If that works, we're going to expand into that Buchanan parking lot that we have in front of the old federal courthouse. So that's our immediate plans for that. And for the most part, that's probably our next little step that's going on right now. And that'll be significant, because the big lot in between our two properties that faces the courthouse is just a terrific location for apartments and some light retail. And that's going to be our focus probably for the next. And we have one other building that we're looking at picking up that's in the area. But so that's it. And I mean, the opportunity is there. And when we pick them up, we usually have enough excitement that people come in and lease them up.
So I mentioned that I've got a couple things up my sleeve, and one is kind of a transformational project, in my opinion. It's large. It's gonna, part of it is rehabbing some existing historically significant structures. Part of it is tearing down eyesores and rebuilding net new. Part of it is just repurposing junk lots into something that's productive. And while that's a great tease, I really can't tell you much more. Unfortunately, there's other outside forces that dictate that we check a few more boxes before we actually have a release. But it's going to be really cool. It's going to be pretty big, and I think it's going to kind of change a little bit of perception of what's achievable in downtown. Not as large in scope, but hopefully as impactful from a consumer standpoint. I am well underway of developing a food hall downtown. It'll be about a 10,000 square foot building with a pretty large outdoor component as well. We've secured the site. We have plans are well under design. We're having conversations with tenants and investors and everything else, and the name and the details and location will be forthcoming hopefully pretty soon. We've got a lot of momentum there, but very excited. It's certainly a concept that other great cities have, and it's a social environment that we've not yet been able to capture, and I'm scared and proud of it all at the same time because it's a pretty big endeavor. It's going to be a little scaled, a little large for our size city, but I think we can consume it. So, and then I've got another wild hair that Anita doesn't know about that I'm not even going to tell you about. So it's early.
I think I've talked about our apartment complex enough. I'm hoping that it will break ground before the end of the year, but it's been a long process because we're going through HUD for one of their loans for this particular project. We also have some, I forgot to mention that we have filming of low-budget films on the LPTFA campus. We have 2 warehouses. One of them's currently leased to Curmudgeon Films. And Griff First, who's Curmudgeon Films, who'll be back in town. He's got a couple of other more movie projects that he'll be building the sets and doing some filming on our property. We also acquired some additional warehouses behind us. We just acquired them, so we don't have that great idea for it just yet, but we're working on it. So we have some cool things happening.
Thank you, Ryan, for finally talking about the food hall so that you said it, I didn't, and now everyone knows. Really exciting to hear about some of the projects that are going on. And, every week, really, we're talking to folks about space that they're looking for, ideas that they have. I'm drinking a lot of coffee at Carpe Diem with folks who want to talk about their good ideas. So I'm excited to see a lot of this come to fruition and continue to build that momentum we talked about. And Ryan, I love what you said about changing perceptions about what's achievable through accomplishing things. And I think you're going to see a lot of that in the next 18 months as we see 200 apartment or Stephen's going to make me say dwelling units come online, and mixed use buildings, new retail, and Jim, it's exciting to hear about the apartments that you're thinking about because that's a great location in the downtown area. We talked a little bit about opportunity zones earlier. I want to kind of bounce back to that and change the topic to incentives more generally. We spent the morning talking about opportunity zones being an addition to other things that you can stack to accomplish projects in downtown Lafayette. I'm curious to hear from this group, what incentives are you utilizing? You mentioned historic tax credits to get projects done. But before we dig into that, Jim brought up a great point on our call earlier this week about first kind of defining incentives and talking about what they are and how you use them and how they don't make a project happen, but they can help to make a project happen, if that makes sense. Jim, you could probably explain it better than I can. You want to?
Well, I think from our standpoint, the historic tax credit's a terrific deal, but there's a lot of hurdles and obstacles to follow with that. From our standpoint, we've been fortunate. Whenever we've picked up a property, we generally had an idea what we're going to do with it, and almost as soon as we picked it up, it moved so fast there wasn't time to get it on the historic register, go through all the hurdles you have to go through. And so we've applied for them 3 or 4 times, and we finished building the project before we got approval. And I think they would have kept us from doing what we needed to do to be able to have the tenant if we did that. We took advantage of the Go Zone when it happened, which is a terrific program, and we did real well with that. But we haven't explored any of the others, mainly from the historic standpoint. It really restricts what some of we wouldn't be able to have the tenants we had if we'd used the historic tax credits on the buildings that we've got, even though they're on the local register. So that's about it from our standpoint. We haven't had to use them yet. It hadn't been a fit for any of the projects that we worked on.
So Rebecca, we had a conversation yesterday with someone who's looking at renovating a historic building, and we actually said, you need to talk to Rebecca because she's done this a few times before. So can you share a little bit about y'all's work?
The historic tax credits are particularly beneficial to us because we don't pay taxes, so we're able to sell the credits. So, for instance, on a small project, our office building was, $300,000, but we were able to get back when we sold those credits to other investors $70,000. So it reduced our end cost on the building. So we use them every opportunity we have because it works from our standpoint as a developer because it's money we'll get back on the project. Other incentives that we've used before is the low-income tax credit for Uptown Lofts. That's a low-income housing tax credit. It's a workforce development housing. And that's a completely different animal and only really works when you're doing low income. But that also reduces the cost of it. So I think as many, and I'm not really sure how we're going to be able to use the opportunity zone and really get my hands on, how that affects our pro forma and, all those details. But I'm really excited about that. And I think it could be a great tool for a lot of development downtown Lafayette.
So incentives are an interesting word that I think are often used. It's often used far too broadly, and I've been on a mission, and that some other peers in the community have been on a mission to try to turn that word into somewhat of a scary and ugly word in this community into more of a tool that's available in a toolbox. I mean, I can tell you, I work all along the Gulf Coast, and this is the only market that I'm aware of that when you say the word tip or pilot or EDD, pitchforks and torches come out. Like, it's just wild. Every development has opponents and they want to understand better. Most of the time I find the opponents don't actually care to understand. They just want to be opponents. They don't even really ask the source of what it is that they're fighting. And that's fair and balanced, but incentives are a toolbox, and other communities are using them, and we're scared of it because the people with the torches come out at city council meetings or IDB meetings or whatever, and everybody else is doing little league games and homework with their kids, and that becomes the real voice, and it's just not true. And a lot of the incentives, they're not giveaways. A lot of the developers are actually backing via personal guarantee. If the project doesn't come to fruition, then the incentive gets repaid in full, often with compounded interest. So it's not this handout that people think it is. And so there's got to be some education in that. So, Rebecca talked about some very project-specific incentives. And for downtowns, there's sometimes we just got to make the problem bigger. Like, we're going to throw a huge pilot on a big swath of land and piss a bunch of people off, and sorry. Like, it is what it is. I mean, go look at New Orleans Warehouse District, all right? So kind of between the Superdome and heading towards the river, You know, I worked on the corner of Girard and Barone for many, many years, and there was the Scheffler Cadillac dealership on the corner, which is now the Rouse's after, you know, post Katrina, and then where all of the South Market District buildings are, we're talking $500-600 million of buildings that people live in and own, and retailers operate on the ground floor in their parking garages. Those are all just hot ass parking lots that we paid a monthly fee on, and that's all it ever was. They put a pilot on that whole track that enabled the developers to mitigate enough risk to go vertical. Look at that, is one of the most dynamic neighborhoods in Louisiana, and it's not even close. We talk about putting a pilot on some Swatches Lane in Lafayette, and I mean, all hell's going to break loose. This group, along with people not in this group, have to understand that it's not a bad word. It's not a dirty word. It's a tool. And we've got to change the perception. And then when you start de-risking people who are using their own money, the aggressiveness and the momentum really accelerates.
Ryan's been waiting to say that for like an hour, so. Eric, you pointing back to, you know, Greenville, but it's closer to home in Baton Rouge and New Orleans and Lake Charles. We heard a lot about the way that projects happened in other communities was through public-private partnerships. It was through utilizing, you know, incentives. When we spoke at the council meeting yesterday, Andre did a great job of organizing a number of folks who went on the trip to talk to the council about our takeaways. I think it was Kenneth Boudreaux said, you know, we don't like the T words in Lafayette, taxes and tip. We don't like talking about that. And then I just wrote down that tool, and toolbox also starts with a T. So, you know, I think we should remember that. Eric, talk to us a little bit about how we should be utilizing public-private partnerships in this community to see projects happen in the downtown area.
Thanks for creating a time distance between me and Ryan.
You're welcome.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, just in I'm going to do my best to answer it. Whether I do or not, it'll be up to you guys. But just in the creative way that other people use it, you know, you look at people just consider things different. Like in Greenville, even in Baton Rouge, the parking is considered infrastructure. Baton Rouge did it at least 3 times that I'm aware of, where the triple P, or the public-private partnership, was between the city or some entity with the city and the developer, and the parking structure was the thing. So it seems as though in Greenville, the TIF, the size of the TIF and the area, the limits of the TIF weren't project specific. It was a larger area that TIF grew in funding as momentum came downtown, right? They established the TIF early, when I would imagine it was easy, right? So establish it, draw the biggest one you can, avoid every house if you can do it, and draw the biggest TIF you can. And maybe it's not generating much revenue, but it will. Bill Rodier's got one in St. Landry Parish, covers 3 exits. At some point, Bill, you're going to have a bunch of money to deal. 4 exits, you're right. I keep forgetting about that last one. But they established it early, and it's going to grow for them. So in Greenville, they built, from what I remember anyway, 12 parking structures. They're partners in 12 parking structures. They're like the parking czar for downtown Greenville. And some of those are close to, if not already been, you know, those time out, you know, and then when they time out, their TIF is somewhat running out, and now they've moved. They love the idea so much they've started moving on to what they call a synthetic TIF. They've just created a different way to do it. But again, I don't know what it's going to take to change the vision and attitude behind this T word, but it seems to be working on the north side okay with Target and in that area. So there are a little different ways to do it, and you do have to talk to the sheriff. We're going to have to talk to the school board, right? We're going to have to, the state's not going to give up their portion. We can forget about it. But we do have control over what, you know, we can do with a TIF here, and how it can grow, and how it can grow downtown, and how it can grow other places. You can do a site-specific one. It's just for that project. Or we can do a big one. I'm a much bigger proponent in let's just draw the biggest line, biggest polygon we can, and let's just go from there. So I'm also a proponent of expanding the CBD. If it's going to be easy, maybe just do it now. Let's have some vision. Let's assume that it's going to be bigger. Let's assume that we're going to get some momentum. Let's expand the CBD now. Then we can draw a bigger TIF. So I think that is something that certainly, with the creativity of that, and actually it's simple. You know, it doesn't sound like it was extremely difficult. And then the city, run that opportunity through a cost-benefit analysis. They just don't agree to do every one. There's a cost-benefit analysis that they run it through. If it makes it, great. If it doesn't make the grade, sorry. You go back to the drawing board. We're going to move on to another developer. Maybe there's money for you, maybe not. So it's not just bring it and they'll do it. There's got to be a cost-benefit analysis that aligns with the creation of that TIF.
Just to follow up on what Eric was talking about as a real example, and we had some phone conferences with Greenville. I didn't end up going on the trip, but before that, in several meetings, and the example of the parking structures and what's needed. It costs between $15,000 to $20,000 per space to build a parking garage, and it ends up taking about according to Greenville, $144, and they're real up to date on $144 per space per month to be able to pay for the structure. And so you really have to change the culture, and there's been some dialogue about that in different meetings here. The parking garage downtown, you can rent spaces under certain conditions for $25 or $30 a month. To buy a piece of property downtown and rent space in the parking lot costs at least $60 a square foot to break out even. But if you built a parking garage and bought the land, it would cost almost $150 a space to make it pay for. So the culture needs to change. And one of the things that, relative to the parking garage and the TIFs, there's got to be a public-private parking partnership to make that particular thing work. So unless you do that, the parking is really dead without a tremendous amount of risk from a developer to come in and do it on his own. Kind of agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
So the last time that we created, and the first time, we created a comprehensive plan for Lafayette. Plan Lafayette was in 2014. And then a downtown action plan was formed in 2015 to follow on to that. And that's what we've been using as our guide for developing in Lafayette. When we started these conversations, we didn't have the old federal courthouse in the mix. We didn't have the Buchanan redevelopment site in the mix. We didn't have 200 residential units underway. We weren't having a lot of conversations about mixed use space. And so one of the things that I want to hit on before we open it up to questions from the audience is, you know, our city has evolved. Things have changed. Things have developed around downtown Lafayette and throughout the parish. And so we want to make sure that we're open to talking about how do we amend our plan to follow us along in this journey as we grow as a downtown and as we grow as a broader community. So the folks on this panel have played an active role in one way or another in the development of Plan Lafayette, the UDC, the Downtown Action Plan, and its implementation over the last number of years as developments have occurred. So I'm curious, in your views, how does Plan Lafayette, the UDC, and the Downtown Code help downtown's development? And what should we be doing right now as we have a year to explore what we need to do to amend it to make it help us develop in the future? It's a two-part question. Ryan, you want to go first? They might clap for you.
Eric said at least a two-part question. I agree with him. You know, look, I'll take the UDC, then I'll pass it off to others, right? The UDC has been controversial in some circles, I think progressive in other circles, and it's probably a combination of both, and that's probably okay as well. You know, it was a well thought out code that had a lot of opportunity for input from a lot of people. Some people took advantage of that input and were very instrumental in where we got. Other people didn't and bitch about it later, right? And so it's it is a progressive code, and it does make the city better because it's not just a one size fits all. If you're zoned here, then you can do everything, right? Like, that's not how great cities are planned. That's how easy cities are planned. But it goes back to if you're wearing your developer hat, you better subscribe to difficult days. Like, that's just part of your gig. And so, look, and then there were the unintended consequences of the UDC. Like, there was no way that the people who crafted it were able to identify every facet of a project and how it would be impacted. And so there have been subcommittees since then that have said, hey, how do we deal with these unintended consequences? And there's been a substantial amount of amendments to the UDC that have created alternative zones. So the MX, it was just, that's what it was. Now there's a 1 and a 2. And people are still stuck on the original draft and don't even realize that there's options. And it goes back to, well, we looked at the book and it says we can't do it, so we can't do it. And it's just not how you get projects to fruition. You do a pre-app meeting. I do 4 pre-app meetings, right? And let the folks in the administration and in the staff at the staff level give you guidance how the rules can be bent. Because look, I'm a rule breaking SOB and I've been forever. Ask my old man. I can promise you. Most of y'all know him. And but that's what you just have to kind of do, right? Is prescribe to that, and you want to fit in a guideline, and there's certainly a structure, but it's a guide with some rules that can be modified if you've got a really good narrative and if the project merits it and it makes sense, right? I mean, that's part of what has to happen to get somewhere within any code, not just this one.
Thank you for your comments, sir. I will tell you about the UDC downtown code, the downtown component as well. I will tell you, I think it does set a bar. It does give us a vision. There is an outcome. It is trying to give us an outcome that as a community we were wanting to see. So I think nothing is perfect, but I do think it does do that. It gives us an outcome. I guess honestly, I just really haven't had many issues with it. We've had some inconsistencies with landscaping, with one reviewer being pretty aggressive and another one being almost the opposite. So there's some, I guess, if you will, maybe a little inconsistent in some aspects. But, you also happen to discover things. I personally think it's a pretty interesting idea, the whole, under, zone CM1, you can choose A or B, right? So if you want density, you can choose A. If you want something a little less dense, you can choose B. And we're working on a 4 or 5 story building now that's not in downtown, it's close, more around the university. So we're CM1A, great, right? We're it's pushing us right up on the street. We have a maximum setback of 15 feet, not a minimum, right? So I can't be any further away from the street than 15 feet. We got a nice area plan, wide sidewalks, and I'm just kind of thinking as we're designing, we're 15 feet, and I got overhead power. And my building's higher than overhead power, and somebody's going to die trying to install. Right, I got scaffolding. Right, in a lot of places you got to be at least 10 feet away from scaffolding with any kind of overhead power. Right, and I'm gonna be right in it. So it's like, okay, well, that's going to be fun. Haven't really solved that one yet, but it's just I wouldn't even call it necessarily unintended consequence. I just think it's a discovery. It's a moment in time where you're like, okay. Then a couple years ago, I don't know if it was official or not, but we may have been one of the firms that figured out there was a sewer problem. And so we had projects that got canceled because our clients, and luckily enough, we did our jobs. We investigated the sewer quick enough. And what basically we found was that the UDC and the comprehensive plan was a great idea. It just didn't quite marry up to what the reality was in the ground or essentially overhead. So as we work through it, those are just some things that we'll have to start to pay attention to. Hopefully we don't find those out the hard way. Stewart's over here, he builds buildings, right? Nobody bothers to go out there and look up. I assure you, you're walking around the site. Are you going to stand there and look up and decide that overhead power is not ever really giving us many problems? Well, it's going to cause the issue with this project. It's going to be a big one.
There's a lot of projects that's going to be an issue.
Oh yeah, I think so.
And then, yeah, you hold it for me. Yeah, please. Yeah, this is awesome. Give me. You know, the other side, not just the technicalities of the power line, but if you're redeveloping or creating a new structure that's a beautiful structure. You know, I had a client, we had this really nice rendering of the elevation and what the building materials are going to look like. And he said, well, let me take this dry erase marker and draw these poles right here and then draw these lines. And how does it look now? And it didn't look very good, right? And so part of the issue is meeting with the utility providers, which some are kind of in-house via LUS, and others are the telecom guys that we have no control over. And we're going to say, like, we need to cut your poles down. And that's okay. That's going to make the world a better place for everybody, because I don't think anybody really wants to look at it. But that's an example, you know, kind of more from an optic standpoint. You know, there's some, especially in the downtown code, it talks about, because we want a walkable environment, we don't want these big, long, blank walls. So we're supposed to make sure that we institute, from a design standpoint, X amount of windows so it's not a big, long, blank wall. But what do those windows do when they're not looking at anything? They're not serving a purpose for the inside. I mean, that's kind of an unintended consequence. I'd rather see, in today's environment, have that wall and let's paint a mural on it that's culturally relevant and Instagrammable, and people want to be taking their picture in front of it, right? Like, I think that's a better option than saying you have to put these windows in, they have to be this big, and it's going to add this many dollars to your project, and they're not serving any purpose. I mean, but so it just kind of happened that way, and I think, had I been a part of a project that happened to, I would have liked to hope that I would have said, let's take a step back and maybe go ask the municipality, can we do this instead? And it probably would have taken some hoops to jump through, but I'm confident that the people that I work with would have tried to find a way to make that work. I mean, it's those little things, but we've just got to work through them as we discover them. I kind of like discovery.
So if you kind of listen to what Eric and Ron are talking about, the UDC's created a set of rules to follow that are fairly complex, but there's a good plan intended for it to become. But building a successful project takes a team of professionals that understand what the goal is of the community, what it takes to run through those obstacles. And I think down the road is, and I think it'll happen this way, is that there'll become a compromise between planning, zoning, UDC, and what's going on. And when the project is needed enough to happen, to compromise enough to make sure we don't lose a good project because we're too tight on our rules. So I think it's moving in that direction. And you're right, the pre meeting that you have before you even decide whether you're going to buy the land, that's what's important. And some people don't think of it. They look at a lot, man, this is a terrific site for whatever, and buy the land. Then they're stuck with it and they can't do anything with it. So I love the pre-planned stuff. That's good.
We have friends in New Orleans, like most of us do as well. And I think just remember to use the word equivalency. You really, New Orleans couldn't build hardly anything anymore if they followed the code by the code, right? So they offer equivalencies for different things. Like the windows, I think the mural is a really good idea. Say, look, what would you rather? I can do this, or I can do this. And I have found that the city is, they don't necessarily want to solve your, they'll help you solve your problems, but help yourself too. You know, coming up with those creative kind of ideas does help sort of push the meter a little bit further down the road. So.
I actually think there's a lot of really good things that came out of the UDC. And of course, a lot of it is, you know, your old subdivision zoning in just one book. But one of the really positive things is that the staff gets so much opportunity to be able to say okay to something without you having to go before the Planning Commission or the Board of Zoning Adjustment for every little thing that occurs. So it was a really positive thing. And as far as design code goes, as far as downtown, I'm really kind of excited about it. The only other place in Lafayette that has a design code that you probably don't know about is at Louisiana Avenue and the interstate for that shopping center. And when I was at Planning and Zoning, we wrote that code and we didn't know what the hell we were doing. It was through some trial and error, and we did several amendments to it, and I think it's really effective, and I think it proved itself. So I'm really excited for downtown that they will be able to do that, and I'm sure there'll be some amendments to it because there's not going to ever be a perfect code. But so anyway, that's my input.
So we're going to transition to questions in just a couple minutes, but I want to give Gary a second to talk about. He's representing banks today, but there's a number of other banks in the audience, and I worked at Iberia Bank. I've worked closely with a number of banks through my time at One Acadiana, and every single bank in this community sees itself as a partner of the community and its development. And so banks play a really important role in not only helping to finance projects like this, but in helping to make our community a better place in general. And so I want to give Gary a second to talk more about that and give some love to our banks.
Of course, in addition to financing projects, it's important that we show our support. It's important that our employees understand that when we get involved with a project, that they're involved with the project too. And so supporting all the downtown activities is very important to us, and I think it's important to everybody, all the banks in town. And so that's one way that we bring additional support. I'm going to go back, take a step back, and this is probably might be a little bit humorous, but you're talking about following the rules. Well, as bankers, of course, we have to follow a lot of rules. But when it comes to financing development projects like this downtown, we try to be as flexible as we possibly can. We try to think out of the box. We try to be creative to create the can-do spirit if we run into an obstacle. So we do have that attitude that we want to be successful along with everyone else. I want to say something maybe a little bit out of not following the script a little bit, but Anita's enthusiasm to me has been pretty incredible. A lot of you were here for the commercial realtor presentation. It's been a few weeks now, I guess, a couple of months. And I think you were the best presenter that day, I'm telling you. And yeah, I know. Like I said, I think you were the best presenter that day. Ryan, you were pretty good too. But your enthusiasm for downtown was very catching, and I walked out. I had to leave. I didn't sit through the entire day, but I had to go back to the bank, and I told several people, I said, man, I know more about downtown now. I thought I knew a lot about downtown, but I know way more about it than I did before, and so I think your leadership is great, and I think, again, that word momentum, I think you're creating a lot of that yourself, so thank you for your leadership.
Now we're tied, Ryan, so checkmate. I'm just kidding. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. Really quickly before we transition to Q&A, does anyone have any final thoughts? I know we covered a lot of topics. Does anyone want to kind of sew it up in a minute or so, or are you ready to dive in?
I just had one follow-up to the little parking structure thingy we were talking about. And I thought this was kind of important to understand that the Baton Rouge, I'm not 100% positive, but I talked in detail with some of the people in Greenville. I think I said that right, Greenville. They don't plan to make money on their parking structures. That's not the idea, right? So they build a parking structure. A lot of those parking structures are free to park. It's that's their investment So the developer's not paying for it. The city's paying for it. Like I said, a lot of them are free. And then, well, what are they getting in return? Well, at least there, many of those buildings, there's 10 stories sitting on top of it. So there's your answer, right? So it's the tax dollars that they're getting back, right? That's sort of the idea around it. So I thought that was, to jump off of what Jim was saying, to ask the developer to put that burden in his number, it's going to be a while. We do work in Dallas and Austin, and those parking structures are a part of that project. And as far as I know, they're not getting much in the way of incentives. But when you look at the rental rates, and there's 450 units going in, and right, they're HUD funded, 221 D3s or what have you, their amortization is long. So it's just a different community. It's a different way to build there. Here, we're going to need some help. We're going to need some help for a long time. So again, the tax incentive for them in Greenville was they actually don't even plan to make money on the parking. Their idea is the economic impact that's going to come out of that project by the fact of doing it.
So we have plenty of time for questions, which I'm excited about. Before we transition, Corey, are you going to help with the mic? We'll keep one down here and one for the audience. But I have to thank the Southwest Group. They provided your lunch today. So Jim, Bryant, Danny, thank you for making today possible. We appreciate you. And I appreciate all the panelists for taking the time to do this, sharing your thoughts. And now the hard questions begin. Hey, Greg. We're going to let Greg Gotro go first. He seems excited.
I just like this. I only have 5 points. Questions at the end. Real quick. First of all, Ryan, great speech. Thank you. Would you get on the radio and do that a few times, please? Second of all, we do have a river. Getting hardware to the river is 7/10 of a mile. Think about that. 7/10 of a mile. So I like your idea about Eric about broadening the CDB and thinking of downtown. It's a little bit bigger in scope. I understand there's a district and all these things, but really downtown can provide some great connectivity if we understand that it really is close to a lot of things we don't realize. It's close to, like College Slim Road, 7/10 of a mile from the river, literally. So a lot of opportunities there. 3, TIFs and pilots are viewed as being used only for the big guys, and it's because the big guys know how to use them. But the truth is they exist for everybody. There are laws in the state of Louisiana. You can refuse them locally, and everybody's just going to pass you by. Because examples in New Orleans where they put a TIF on a Walmart and did a project somewhere across town. I mean, there's some pretty radical use. We don't do anything like that. I did want to say, though, that we did get the state to match on the Louisiana Avenue project because it was really in an area that needed income growth. And we think we've done something there. But what I'm saying is through the DDA, through LEDA, through the LPTFA, and maybe through the foundation, small groups of developers. Everybody worries about the small. I do too. Small groups of developers need to come together and do a little co-opetition. And you could form districts, TIF districts and pilot districts and things like EDDs, and maybe help yourselves by banding together. It's very frustrating when we're dealing with the person who's just on the cusp of being able to take advantage of these things, but it costs more in lawyer time, no offense, than it does to get the incentive, right? And so you pull a few of these together using various associations, and like I said, my district's the whole parish, so the foundation's out there, we got chambers, we got entities that can pull these things together. It's a thought, right? And the DDA could be the first example of pulling 15 small developers together on a TIF or a pilot. And then I'm going to say this because I think it's important, and Eric almost said it. A very big construction guy, one of the biggest, told me the other day, Lafayette's reputation is that, and it's no news, I've discussed this with people in the city all the time, is that we're the hardest place to do business in the state. And we're one of the hardest in the South, if not the hardest. Now, I was also told that the number one thing in the transition for the last administration was to overcome that. And I will say, without being political in any way, shape, or form, that I am extremely grateful and extremely pleased that a lot of progress has been made. Yes, rule followers, but if you follow the rules to the nth degree, we won't build anything. You've got to figure out how to get things done. We have people in place now that I feel, once again, not trying to be political, not trying to talk about before, but I feel like the people in place in our city are trying to help you get things done. And I'm very, very excited about that. I'm pleased with that. I love working with them. It's a whole different attitude other than you can't do it. So here's my question. The elephant in the room. Oh, by the way, somebody said we don't have a sewer problem. We're just too full of bull. The elephant in the room for downtown, in my mind, is I-49. Because I see progress on Louisiana Avenue. I see progress that's coming and emphasis coming to University Avenue. I see progress on downtown itself. But I see a pretty blightful flight on Evangeline Thruway because investors just don't know what's going to be happening there. And so the elephant in the room to me is, how do we address that? Can we get something, and I know it's above a lot of our pay grade, can we get something from the state and federal in the next round of hearings that'll give us some assurance that if you buy something or develop something, it'll be there 10 years from now, or it won't, or whatever. Because that's, in my mind, holding us back a lot for downtown. But you're doing a great job, and I appreciate this forum today.
Thanks, Greg. For everyone else, you can't ask a question that long. If anybody wants to try to tackle I-49, we did turn that question down in the earlier session, said we should maybe have an I-49 day. Jim?
If we don't get together as a community and understand the federal government and the state know what the answer to that project is, and it's only going to be that answer. When this community finally understands and all gets together, even if it's 10% that holler foul play or whatever it is, it's not going to happen and the money's going to go somewhere else. That's not our money that's going to build that. It's to be the federal government and the state. The community has to get together. Our projects are going to pass Lafayette just like they have for decades. It's time for us to get together. And if we don't get together, our delegation's not going to be able to get together because they're getting pulled apart. So that has to happen.
We have another question. I can't find you. Right here.
Hi, my question's for Eric. So please understand, I don't need, and it may be for Greg, I don't need you to explain the opposition to T's, tax and TIF and so on. What you said was, we need to check with the school board and the sheriff. I understand they reap the tax revenue, but tell me about the wheels of government. Because did I leave something out? Does the school board get a vote? I understand we might tick them off if a TIF were to pass because they get less revenue. Can you address the machinations of government? Does the school board get a vote? I don't remember the last TIF project and all the wheels and how the wheels turned.
TIFs are established by the city council.
That's simple.
But their money isn't effective. You know, generally speaking, a TIF is a sales tax TIF, and it only, in Lafayette Parish, has been a penny added. So there's not been an existing tax that's been effective.
Well, we did have some meetings with some attorneys from Baton Rouge, and I think they felt like that, and maybe what they meant was you've got to have a conversation with them because it's tax increment financing. So, you know, you're not going to give them a pay cut. They just may not get any of the increment increase in that area. So they may or may not, I believe they will have a dog in the fight is my personal, you know. Yeah. A poodle in the fight. Wow.
They are different, and when we put together the one that we did for the Ambassador Town Center, we met with all the stakeholders, and they understood. We laid out how this worked, what the mechanism looked like, and that while this tax may stay flat for this period of time, there's other taxes that actually increase because it's just a poorly assessed agricultural field on Kali Saloon, but that's another day. And ultimately, though, once that debt service gets repaid, then this whole new incremental piece that is far and above what they forgo as an increase, again, not reducing, shows up. And that's a huge boon. And in that interim time frame, a lot of other taxes were getting collected. So it's always like there's everything all in this bucket or all this bucket. It's not. The buckets really intermingle. But I do think that anybody who's doing anything that's quote unquote incentive based should take the time and the effort and meet with everybody who's involved. It's the right thing to do.
For downtown to grow.
Mr. Chad. What I see as a challenge. I mean, we've talked about a few of them. I do think that the attempt is being made, but in some of the areas that appear to have some prime sort of property to be developed, there is some utility issues. I think that's for the projects that I'm aware of. That is going to be the thing, and that has been some things that have slowed it down to this point. And it's difficult to determine. There's not been a sort of a comprehensive study, a proactive comprehensive study to understand exactly where some of those areas are. I think they got a general idea. But if you wanted a specific site and you wanted to know, we want to put, you've got to basically go to them and go to LUS and say, hey, I want to put X amount of apartments here. Then they're going to analyze it. And I guess going to Jim's comment too, your pre with the city, it better be talking about utilities. Tie up your property, and get your option together, and they'll go talk about the utilities. I think that, just off the top of my head, would be one of the challenges. That's a solvable issue, by the way. So,
Gotcha. Actually, in downtown, unlike greenfield development, somewhere else, the first person I've called has been LUS, and specifically giving them an address. And I know the guys where you can email them, hey, look, this is what I'm roughly trying to do. Here's the address. What kind of headache am I looking at? And I've gotten a nice screenshot that shows all the water lines, all the sewer lines, where the mains are, what the size lines are. You can get it pretty quickly. And then from that, you can determine, hey, how much brain surgery we have to go through to go vertical at what scope, right? So that's the first box to check, that we as developers in other spaces, that's something that kind of comes a little bit further down the line. But I don't think there's a singular issue. We run across a couple of different items that are unexpected, but that's par for the course, I think.
I think one of the obstacles that we have, and I don't know that it's unique to Lafayette, but there's some pieces of property downtown that will never get bought by anybody. The heirs of people that have bought the property are in New York, or they've had some wealthy families that have had it, and they have, whether they're keeping it for the heritage of their family or whatever. And it makes it very difficult, and you really have to look into those to collectively get a group of property together big enough to be able to do a property that you want to put, because you can't acquire the property at any price. So that is an obstacle we've run across. We try to run around it. In fact, if anything, we'll try to buy a key piece that we can control the whole thing, because we won't sell it. But anyway, that's another story.
that's just good business.
So I agree with Jim. We've been trying to acquire 8,000 square feet piece of property. and that property owner thinks it's worth $150,000, that's a problem. And I would say electric and sewer. I mean, those are the two.
I think moving too fast, and what I mean by that is the momentum. Again, I keep using the word, but you want to have victories, you want to continue to have successes, and you want people to be able to see those successes. And so, moving too fast, you'll get bogged down maybe trying to do too much too fast. So, patience is probably another key word to maintain the momentum that's taking place now.
I'm going to answer it too. Perceptions, I think, is an issue. I think people think they know a lot more than they might know about the ins and outs of what's happening downtown, some of the challenges that we have, if there are solutions to them, whether or not they're going to take a long time or we can fix them, in the meantime. Whether or not we have enough parking, whether or not it's safe, how much money we're actually investing into the downtown area from a capital improvement program standpoint. So I think education is the answer to the challenge of perceptions. And that's where a lot of you come in, is helping us figure out how to kind of frame what's really going on and where we want to go and how we get there, the challenges along the way, and then how we kind of speak from the same sheet of music about answering those questions so that we can clear up some of the misperceptions. You had a question in the front.
Ever accused me of being so as we coming up with some sort of solution as far as parking for the courthouses and then community self-improvement. It's becoming just intolerable to me. And I'd love to be able to walk a few blocks. They're walking a few blocks, close to blocks of me. It's very difficult and carrying the load that I have to carry into the courthouse. It's becoming just really impossible.
I think one of the things that Anita and DDA is, we've just,
Do we have
Oh, but-
solution to parking around the courthouse?
and so I think since Anita's gotten there, we've had that discussion even on some one-on-ones, is they're collecting the data of all of the park instructors, all of the private property owners, and trying to put a collective plan together. And one of the things that we've suggested that I think is an important thing is to get a professional person involved, in this case a civil engineer, that understands the parameters of what it takes to build a parking garage, that understands UDC, and developing a plan for parking access throughout the whole area the DDA is responsible for. So I think they're on the right track with that. We're trying to get some people that have expertise in those areas to volunteer time to work with them. And by the way, just as a little side thing, it's good to have a committee of 30 people, but somebody on the committee needs to have enough expertise to contribute something to what they're doing. And so anyway, that's just a little side thing. But I think we're maybe going to try to encourage them hiring a civil engineer to work with them to expand that plan. And maybe we had in our phone discussion the other day to have a national group come in and assist in managing the parking for the whole downtown area. So I think that's what's going to need to happen, not just for the courthouse, but for any buildings, the public buildings or whatever there. We have to make the parking more accessible to everybody. agree.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. A couple of you mentioned ties between downtown and the university and how that can be stronger. Wondering if you could explain more about what that stronger connection looks like to you all and what you're doing to increase that, or what is being done to increase that.
Can you repeat the question?
So a couple of the panelists mentioned connections between downtown and the university, how it's a really good asset, but that it could be and should be a lot stronger. So curious what that connection looks like to y'all, and then what is being done in order to up it currently.
Well, I do believe there's some, at least general plans of how that could be made. I think certainly Johnson Street is, a cavernous, kind of an idea right there. It's, 5 lanes, universities 4, no turning lane right there in front of Martin Hall. Traffic speeds are an issue, I think. So, I mean, certainly, I don't know exactly if there's anything being done about it. But, I in my mind, I can see some solutions, when it comes to can portions of Johnson Street become a boulevard. In New Orleans, you got the neutral ground, right? Let's just get across 2 lanes and rest, right? Like Frogger, right? And then we can try to make it across the, right? Have just a little bit more traffic control, reduce the speeds a little bit. And I think some of the development that's happening downtown, a lot of it is market rate driven. It's not necessarily student housing, but it's market rate driven. I think that's going to pull a few students in that direction. Students come downtown Friday night and Saturday night. They probably don't even start taking showers until I go to bed. So it's late, so they're transient in nature. They're not necessarily vested there, especially on Sunday morning when I go in and the trash I got to pick up. So, but I do think the connection needs to be stronger. And I think Johnson Street has a little bit to do with it. The neighborhood back there is getting potentially better. I don't think it has to be along Johnson Street in its entirety, but we can go through the neighborhood and come back, get over to McKinley and some of those other streets back there where it's probably more pedestrian friendly. There's a lot of students that walk and commute that way. So I guess initially.
I'm on the UL Foundation Board, and I'm on the Real Estate Committee. And one of the things that we're working with the university on, I won't go into a whole lot of detail on it, but Dr. Savoy, as part of the master plan for university, has at least 3 corridors that he's identified to make easy, safe access to get across some of these streets, even under their current condition, to get a link between the university and downtown that's walkable and fairly close. And the real estate committee, without letting too much out of whatever, is working with him in order to make critical acquisitions of pieces of property as they become available and as they're cost effective to pick up to develop those 3 corridors. So there's actually a specific plan that's in motion and acquisitions being made, without saying where those corridors are, so that it doesn't get too expensive. But anyway, it's a plan that's in place today.
There's a private side to that answer as well, and the corridors are pretty obvious. And myself and other folks in groups are investigating the same corridors, and I think the market is going to effectively dictate how those are going to play out. One of my favorite things I tell Anita often about perception, which was your problem, and I agree with you, is safety is one of them. And there's the vehicular safety trying to cross the street. There's the perceived safety walking too far from a courthouse, especially if you're a person who's in court and you're defending or prosecuting people. That's a scary endeavor for somebody. But I don't think, I'm not a big fence guy. I don't like building fences. I think light bulbs are the best fences. I think we just start expanding how many light bulbs we have on and how far those light bulbs go, and having those light bulbs go down different corridors, then all of a sudden sudden your safety perception increases substantially. And when that happens, then natural corridors occur where people are walking and biking and scootering or whatever. And then all of a sudden businesses want to be there because they've got foot traffic, right? And then that facilitates competition for a consumer that turns on more light bulbs and more reinvestment. So it's got to be an organic process, and that's one that I think is going to happen collaboratively with both the university from the public side, and then developers from the private side.
So I heard rumor had it that when you guys were in Greenville, that something that also attributed to the success of their downtown was their performing arts center. And so how do we use the Acadiana Center for the Arts as leverage to really grow our downtown?
Great question. I think we already are using Acadiana Center for the Arts to leverage growing downtown, and we can certainly do that more. I think it's all about marketing. There are tons of amazing performances that happen at Acadiana Center for the Arts already. Gatherings once a month for Art Walk, ticketed events, free events that they do in the community. You can go into the gallery for free. I don't know that we need to do anything more than we're already doing, but talk about it more. And that's why those partnerships across different organizations are so important, with Sam Oliver joining ACA at the same time that I joined DDA. We've kind of accelerated those conversations. He comes to our board meetings for DLU. I'm going to start going to his board meetings. And our two teams have been talking a lot about how we market ACA better, because it's already happening. But I think the more performances we can do downtown, the more times we can invite people into the downtown from across the region, by providing things that they can't get elsewhere, the more people want to, eat at restaurants. They want to, park in a parking garage, not right next to it, but further away, so they have to walk by things and enjoy things along the way. Creating more programming, sure, but I think we should start with where we already are, which is we're doing great things. We just need to talk about it and make sure that those shows are full and that those folks understand how they can enjoy the rest of the downtown while they're down there. For future things, I think we need to be thinking about the Hyman Performing Arts Center and the future of that center and how it connects to ACA, how it connects to the university, and talking about those opportunity zones, those districts of connectivity, the oil center, downtown Lafayette. How do we talk to each other about the future of something like a Hyman Performing Arts Center? So we do need to transition to the next session and give you guys a little bit of a break, because we've been sitting down for a long time. But before we do, I want to thank Danielle Bro and Kathy Gilbert and Ann Famoso in particular, but lots of great folks from the Department of Development and Planning. Yes, you heard a lot of acronyms today, and if you're not super well versed into the development conversations, it might have been a little confusing, but Danielle Bro here, if you want to wave your hand, Kathy Gilbert over here, and Ann Famoso all work in development and planning. I think I've met with them like 712 times in the last 6 months. And we talked about pre-app meetings, pre-pre meetings, pre-pre-pre, however many Ryan has meetings. What they're talking about is sitting down with development and planning at the very beginning of an idea that you might have for opening a business in downtown Lafayette or anywhere in Lafayette Parish. And that's free, and it's available to you. And we all want to talk to you before you get started so that we can help you think through your idea and think through some of the challenges you might face along the way, but they're not insurmountable. We just have to talk about them at the beginning before you get started. So if you are interested in doing anything development-wise in Lafayette Parish, these are the 3 ladies you need to get to know. If you want to do it in downtown Lafayette, I can help you facilitate that conversation. We do them almost every week now, and they're great conversations. You will learn a lot. I'm learning a lot. I want to thank our panelists again for your time and staying a little over to answer great questions. Thank you for everything you all do individually and together to make downtown Lafayette a better place.